I used to think I had it all figured out. My name is Rebecca, and at 34, I believed I was living the American dream in our quiet suburban neighborhood in Denver, Colorado. The autumn air was crisp that Tuesday morning as I loaded my 6-year-old son Tommy into my silver SUV, the mountains visible in the distance under a pale October sky. "Mommy, can we get the cereal with the tiger on it?" Tommy asked, swinging his legs from his car seat as I buckled him in. His sandy hair caught the sunlight streaming through the window, and his bright green eyes, so much like his father's, sparkled with innocent excitement. "We'll see, sweetheart," I replied, kissing his forehead. The familiar scent of his strawberry shampoo mixed with the leather interior of the car. "First, we need to get the boring, grown-up stuff." Our neighborhood was picture-perfect that morning. The maple trees lining Oakwood Drive had turned brilliant shades of orange and red, their leaves scattered across manicured lawns. Halloween decorations adorned front porches, carved pumpkins, fake spiderwebs, and friendly ghosts swaying in the gentle breeze. Mrs. Peterson from next door waved from her garden, where she was planting fall mums, her weathered hands dark with soil. "Have a wonderful day, Rebecca!" she called out, her voice carrying the warmth that made our community feel like family. I waved back, feeling that familiar surge of gratitude for the life Michael and I had built together. We'd moved to this Denver suburb 3 years ago when Michael's accounting firm promoted him to senior partner. The mortgage was steep, but we managed comfortably with his salary and my part-time work as a freelance graphic designer. The drive to King Soopers took us through the heart of our community, past the elementary school, where Tommy would start first grade next year, beyond the small park where families gathered on weekends, and through the commercial district where local businesses thrived. The Colorado sun felt warm through the windshield, and I found myself humming along to the soft rock playing on the radio. "Daddy's working really hard lately," Tommy observed suddenly, pressing his face against the window to watch a construction crew working on a new strip mall. My grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Michael had been putting in longer hours recently, often not coming home until after Tommy's bedtime. "Yes, honey, Daddy has some big projects at work," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "But he's doing it for us, to make sure we have everything we need." The grocery store parking lot was moderately busy for a Tuesday morning. Young mothers pushed strollers while juggling shopping lists. Elderly couples moved slowly between the cars, and delivery drivers hurried back and forth with online orders. The automatic doors whooshed open, and we were greeted by the familiar blast of air conditioning and the scent of fresh bread from the bakery. Tommy immediately gravitated toward a display of Halloween candy near the entrance, his eyes wide with wonder at the colorful packages. "Can we get some candy corn, Mommy?" "Please, after we get everything else," I promised, pulling a cart free from the stack. The metal was cold under my hands, and the wheels squeaked slightly as we made our way into the produce section. The store was laid out efficiently, with wide aisles and bright fluorescent lighting that made everything look clean and appealing. I moved methodically through my mental list: organic apples for Tommy's lunch, fresh spinach for salads, the ingredients for Michael's favorite lasagna that I planned to make for dinner tomorrow night. Maybe a home-cooked meal would help us reconnect. We'd barely spoken beyond logistics lately. As we turned into the pasta aisle, Tommy chattering about his plans for show and tell, I felt optimistic about the day ahead. The mundane act of grocery shopping felt grounding, normal. This was my life, simple, predictable, secure. I was reaching for a box of whole wheat penne when Tommy suddenly went quiet beside me. His small hand tugged on my jacket. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice carrying that particular tone children use when they've noticed something adults might not want them to see. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked absently, still comparing pasta prices. "Look." The single word made me turn, and I followed his pointing finger toward the end of the aisle. My heart stopped. There, partially hidden behind a display of marinara sauce, was Michael, my husband of 8 years, the man who'd promised to love and cherish me, was locked in an embrace with someone I recognized immediately: Carmen, our housekeeper. Her dark hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, but her face was pressed against Michael's shoulder in a way that spoke of intimacy, not professional familiarity. Time seemed to slow. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a price check announcement echoed through the store. A shopping cart rolled past us, its wheels clicking rhythmically against the tile floor. But all I could focus on was the scene before me, my husband's hands on another woman's back. The way her body fit against his, the tenderness in their posture that spoke of something far deeper than a momentary lapse in judgment. "Mommy." Tommy's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Why is Daddy hugging the maid?" The question hung in the air between us, innocent and devastating. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that the foundation of his world might be crumbling? How do you maintain the illusion of security when your own reality is shattering? Before I could find an answer, before I could even fully process what I was seeing, Tommy made the decision for me. "Daddy," he shouted, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet grocery store. "Why are you hugging the maid?" The words echoed off the shelves, bouncing between the aisles like a ricocheting bullet. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. The normal sounds of shopping, squeaking carts, rustling bags, quiet conversations fell silent. Michael and Carmen sprang apart as if they'd been burned. His face went white, then red, cycling through emotions faster than I could track them. Carmen's eyes were wide with panic, and she took several steps backward, nearly knocking over a display of pasta sauce. For a moment, we all stood frozen in that awful tableau, my husband and his lover at one end of the aisle, Tommy and me at the other, and between us the weight of a secret that was no longer secret. Then Michael's eyes met mine across the distance, and I saw everything I needed to know reflected there. The guilt, the fear, the resignation of someone who'd been caught in an inexcusable act. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't a mistake. The tenderness I'd witnessed, the way they'd held each other, this was love, or at least what passed for it. This was a relationship, a betrayal that ran deeper than I could have imagined. My legs felt weak. The shopping cart handle was slippery under my suddenly sweaty palms. Tommy was looking between his father and me, confusion and worry creasing his small features. "Mommy," he whispered, "what's wrong? Why does everyone look scared?" I forced myself to breathe, to think, to be the adult in this situation. Whatever was happening between Michael and Carmen, whatever this meant for our marriage, our family, our future Tommy didn't deserve to be traumatized in the middle of a grocery store. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and hollow to my own ears. "Daddy just ran into someone he knows." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't enough. The damage was done. The perfect life I'd thought we were living had been revealed as an illusion, and there was no going back to the innocence of 30 minutes ago when my biggest concern was whether to buy name brand or generic pasta sauce. Michael started walking toward us, his face a mask of forced calm. "Rebecca," he began, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Not here," I said quietly, acutely aware of the other shoppers who were pretending not to watch while hanging on every word. "Not in front of Tommy." He nodded, understanding immediately. Whatever conversation we needed to have, and God knew we needed to have it, it couldn't happen here in the pasta aisle of King Soopers, with our son watching and strangers listening. Carmen had disappeared, vanished between the shelves like a ghost. Part of me wanted to chase after her, to demand explanations, to scream until this nightmare made sense. But the rational part of my mind, the part that was still functioning despite the shock, knew that wouldn't help anyone. "Can we go home now?" Tommy asked, his small voice cutting through the tension. "I don't want cereal anymore." "Yes," I said, abandoning our cart in the middle of the aisle. "Let's go home." As we walked toward the exit, Michael trailing behind us like a man walking to his execution, I realized that home might never feel like home again. The life I'd been living was over, ended not with a dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession, but with a child's innocent question in a grocery store aisle. The automatic doors opened, and we stepped out into the Colorado sunshine. It felt different now, harsher, less forgiving. The mountains in the distance looked the same, but everything else had changed. Everything. The drive home was the longest 15 minutes of my life. Tommy sat quietly in his car seat, sensing the tension that filled the vehicle like a thick fog. Michael followed in his BMW, the car I'd been so proud of when he'd bought it last year, seeing it as a symbol of our success. Now it felt like evidence of deception, a luxury purchased with money while he was lying to my face every single day. I kept my hand steady on the steering wheel, but inside I was falling apart. My mind raced through the last few months, looking for signs I'd missed, clues I'd ignored. The late nights at the office, the sudden interest in going to the gym, the way he'd started putting his phone face down on the nightstand, the distance between us that I'd attributed to work stress. God, how could I have been so blind? "Mommy, your hands are shaking," Tommy observed, his voice small and worried. I glanced down and realized he was right. I pulled over to the curb 2 blocks from our house, my entire body trembling with shock and adrenaline. "I'm okay, baby," I lied, turning around to look at him. His green eyes, so much like his father's, were wide with concern. Sometimes grown-ups need a minute to think. "Are you and Daddy fighting?" The question hit me like a physical blow. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that his father has been having an affair with a woman who cleans our house, who's been in our home 3 times a week for the past 2 years, who's played hide-and-seek with him and made him laugh? "We need to have a talk when we get home," I said carefully. "But no matter what happens between Daddy and me, we both love you very, very much. That will never change." He nodded solemnly, too young to understand the implications, but old enough to know that something fundamental was shifting in his world. When I pulled into our driveway, Michael was already there, leaning against his car with his head in his hands. Our house looked exactly the same as when we'd left, the same white colonial with green shutters, the same carefully maintained garden, the same American flag hanging from the porch. But it felt different now, like a stage set that had been revealed as fake. "Tommy, why don't you go inside and watch cartoons while Daddy and I talk?" I suggested as we got out of the car. "Can I have a snack?" "Of course, sweetheart. There are apple slices in the fridge." I waited until he was safely inside before turning to face my husband. Michael looked older somehow, as if the weight of his secret had been aging him and its revelation had suddenly made it visible. His usually perfectly styled brown hair was disheveled, and there were lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. "Rebecca, I can explain." "No." I cut him off, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Don't you dare try to explain this away. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was somehow innocent." We moved to the backyard, away from Tommy's ears. The October air was cool, and the leaves crunched under our feet as we walked to the patio furniture we'd bought together last spring. Everything here held memories: the barbecue, where we'd hosted Tommy's birthday party, the garden where we'd planted vegetables we'd never gotten to harvest, the swing set where our son played every evening after dinner. "How long?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Michael sat heavily in one of the deck chairs, his head still in his hands. 6 months, he said quietly. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of coming home to me after being with her, of sitting across from me at dinner and pretending everything was normal. 6 months, I repeated, testing how the words felt. They tasted bitter. "Carmen has been in our house 3 times a week for 2 years, Michael. She's played with our son. I've made her coffee. We've talked about her family, her dreams of getting her citizenship. And you've been." "I know how it looks," he said miserably. "How it looks." I stood up abruptly, anger flooding through me like fire. "How it looks?" "It looks like my husband has been having an affair with our employee. It looks like you've been lying to my face every single day for 6 months. It looks like the life I thought we were living was complete fiction. He flinched at the volume of my voice, glancing toward the house where Tommy was presumably watching TV, unaware that his world was imploding. "Keep your voice down," he pleaded. "Don't you dare tell me to keep my voice down," I hissed, but I sat back down, my hands clenched into fists. "You lost the right to ask me for anything the moment you decided to cheat on your wife." For several minutes we sat in silence. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. Somewhere a lawn mower started up. Normal suburban sounds of normal suburban life, while my marriage crumbled around me. "Do you love her?" I asked finally, dreading the answer but needing to know. The pause before he answered told me everything. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think I do." The words hit me harder than I'd expected. Part of me had been hoping this was just physical, a midlife crisis, something we could potentially work through. But love? Love changed everything. "Then why are you still here?" I asked. "Why are you still married to me?" "Because of Tommy," he said immediately. "Because of this house, our life, everything we've built together. Because I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen. For 6 months it happened." "I wanted to tell you," he said, finally looking up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, and for a moment I saw the man I'd married, the one who'd held me while I cried over my father's death, who'd stayed up all night when Tommy had pneumonia as a toddler, who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health. "When?" I demanded. "When did you want to tell me? After another 6 months? After a year? When exactly were you planning to stop lying to my face?" "I don't know," he admitted. I was confused, torn. "I love her, but I love you too. I love our family, our life. You don't get to have both." The words exploded out of me. "You don't get to keep me as your comfortable backup plan while you explore your feelings for someone else. That's not how marriage works, Michael. That's not how love works." A sliding glass door opened next door, and Mrs. Peterson appeared on her deck with a watering can. She waved cheerfully, then seemed to notice the tension between us and quickly went back inside. "The whole neighborhood will know by tomorrow," I said numbly. "Tommy's shouting in the grocery store, us fighting in the backyard. Everyone will know that my marriage is falling apart." "Maybe we can work through this," Michael said desperately. "Maybe we can go to counseling, figure out how to move forward, with Carmen still in the picture." He was quiet for a long moment. "I would have to end things with her." "Would have to or want to?" Another pause. Another devastating silence. "I see," I said, my voice hollow. "You want to keep your wife and your girlfriend. You want to have your cake and eat it too. It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple." I stood up again, pacing to the edge of the patio. "You made a choice, Michael. Every day for 6 months, you made the choice to lie to me, to betray our marriage, to risk our family. And now you want me to make it easy for you by accepting it." From inside the house, I could hear the sounds of Tommy's cartoon bright, cheerful music that felt obscene given the circumstances. My son was in there, innocent and trusting, believing that his parents loved each other and that his family was secure. What am I supposed to tell him? I asked, my voice breaking for the first time since this nightmare began. Michael looked at me helplessly. "I don't know." "You don't know," I repeated. "You started an affair without thinking about how it would affect your son. You risked destroying his sense of security, his trust in his parents, his understanding of what love looks like. And you don't know what to tell him." "I never wanted him to find out this way," Michael said quietly. "How did you want him to find out? What was your plan, Michael? To keep lying indefinitely? To eventually leave us for Carmen? To keep both relationships going until someone forced your hand?" The questions hung in the air between us, unanswered because there were no good answers. There was no version of this situation that didn't hurt everyone involved. "I need you to leave," I said finally. "What?" "I need you to pack a bag and leave. Tonight. I can't have you in this house, sleeping in our bed, pretending everything is normal while I figure out what to do next." Rebecca, please. No, I said firmly. You lost the right to please me 6 months ago. You lost the right to ask me for understanding or patience or anything else the moment you decided to cheat on me. What about Tommy? What about him? You should have thought about Tommy before you started this affair. Michael stood up, his shoulders sagging with defeat. Where am I supposed to go? The question was so absurd it almost made me laugh. I don't know, Michael. Maybe you can stay with Carmen. Maybe you can get a hotel. Maybe you can call your brother. But you can't stay here. And then what? What happens next? I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I was seeing a stranger. The man I'd married would never have done this. The man I'd trusted with my heart and my future and my child would never have betrayed us this way. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I can forgive this. I don't know if I want to forgive this. I don't know if our marriage can survive, or if I even want it to. But you'll think about it? You'll consider counseling, trying to work through this. I was quiet for a long moment, watching a cardinal land on our bird feeder. Such a normal sight, such a peaceful moment, in the middle of the worst day of my life. I'll think about what's best for Tommy, I said finally. That's all I can promise you right now. It wasn't what he wanted to hear, but it was all I had to give. My heart was broken, my trust was shattered, and my future was uncertain. But I was still Tommy's mother, and that role would guide me forward even when everything else felt unclear. As Michael walked toward the house to pack his things, I remained on the patio, staring at the mountains in the distance. They looked the same as they had this morning, solid and unchanging, a reminder that some things endure even when everything else falls apart. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. The woman who had left for grocery shopping this morning no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, someone who would have to learn how to rebuild a life from the wreckage of the one she'd thought she was living. The only question now was what that new life would look like. 3 weeks had passed since that devastating day in the grocery store, and I was beginning to understand that heartbreak isn't just an emotional experience, it's physical. My chest ached constantly, as if someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart until it bruised. I'd lost 8 pounds because food tasted like cardboard, and sleep came in fractured 2-hour segments interrupted by anxiety and the endless loop of questions running through my mind. Tommy had asked where Daddy was exactly 17 times in the first week. I'd given him the same carefully crafted answer each time. Daddy is staying somewhere else while Mommy and Daddy figure some things out, but he loves you very much and you'll see him soon. The soon part was becoming harder to maintain. Michael had texted me constantly the first few days, begging to come home to talk, to work things out. But when I'd asked him point blank if he'd ended things with Carmen, his silence had been answer enough. I was sitting at my kitchen island on a Thursday evening, laptop open, trying to focus on a logo design for a local bakery when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I could see a familiar silhouette that made my stomach clench. Carmen stood on my front porch, her usually perfect posture slouched with what looked like exhaustion or defeat. She wore jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual cleaning uniform, and her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. Most striking were her eyes, red and swollen, as if she'd been crying for days. For a moment, we just stared at each other through the glass. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, to avoid this confrontation entirely. But the larger part, the part that needed answers, that needed to understand how my life had imploded, made me open the door. "What are you doing here?" My voice came out sharper than I'd intended. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly, her slight accent more pronounced than usual. "Please, Rebecca, just 5 minutes." I glanced back toward the living room where Tommy was building an elaborate Lego castle, completely absorbed in his project. He hadn't seen Carmen since that day in the store, and I wasn't ready to explain why the woman who used to bring him cookies and help him with puzzles was suddenly persona non grata. "Not here," I said. Not with Tommy inside. The coffee shop on Maple Street, she suggested. In an hour? Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. 1 hour. And Carmen? Whatever you have to say, it better be important. An hour later, I sat across from the woman who had destroyed my marriage in a cozy cafe that I'd visited countless times before. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd brought Tommy here for hot chocolate, had met girlfriends here for gossip sessions, had even had a few work meetings at these same tables. Now it was serving as the setting for what was sure to be the most surreal conversation of my life. Carmen ordered black coffee with shaking hands. I noticed she'd lost weight too, her usually full cheeks hollow and her sweater hanging loose on her frame. "You look terrible," I said bluntly. She let out a bitter laugh. "Thank you. So do you." We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes, the normal sounds of the cafe espresso machines, quiet conversations, soft jazz creating a soundtrack for our mutual discomfort. "Why are you here?" I asked finally. Carmen wrapped her hands around her coffee mug as if trying to draw warmth from it. "Because I cannot sleep. Because I cannot eat. Because every time I close my eyes, I see your face in that grocery store and your little boy asking that question. And I know that I destroyed something beautiful." "You destroyed my marriage," I corrected her. "Yes," she said simply. "I did. We did. And I need you to know that I am sorry. More sorry than words can say." I'd expected anger, maybe defiance, certainly some attempt at justification. What I hadn't expected was this raw, broken honesty. "Sorry doesn't fix anything," I said, but my voice lacked the venom I'd intended. "I know," she replied. "I know sorry is just a word, and words don't unbreak hearts or unhurt children or undestroy families. But I need to say it anyway because it's true." She took a shaky sip of her coffee, and I noticed her hands were trembling. "How did it start?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. I wasn't sure I wanted to know, but I needed to understand. Carmen was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you remember in March, when you went to visit your sister in Phoenix, when Tommy got sick?" I nodded. Tommy had come down with a stomach bug the day before I was supposed to fly out. Michael had insisted I go anyway, promising he could handle everything. Michael called me to come clean the house early that week because Tommy had been sick everywhere, Carmen continued. When I got there, Michael looked so tired, so overwhelmed. He was trying to work from home and take care of Tommy and keep the house together, and he was failing at all of it. She paused, staring into her coffee. "Tommy was crying because he wanted you, and Michael was on an important conference call, and I just stayed. I made soup for Tommy. I helped him with his fever. I sat with him until he fell asleep. And when Michael got off his call, he looked at me like I had saved his life." "That's when it started?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's when I realized I had feelings for him. Real feelings, not just attraction. I saw him as a father, as a husband trying to do right by his family, and I thought he was the kind of man I had always dreamed of." The words stung, even though they weren't meant as an attack. Carmen had fallen in love with my husband while watching him care for my son. "So when did it actually start?" I pressed. 2 months later. You had that big design project that kept you working late for 2 weeks. Michael and I were at the house at the same time more often, and we started talking. Really talking. About our dreams, our fears, our childhoods. I told him about growing up in Guatemala, about my family, about how hard it was to build a life here alone. He told me about the pressure he felt to provide, about how disconnected he sometimes felt from you and Tommy. He felt disconnected from us. The words came out louder than I'd intended, earning glances from nearby tables. Carmen nodded sadly. "He said you were so good at everything being a mother, running the house, your design work that sometimes he felt unnecessary, like you would be fine without him." "That's ridiculous," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if there was truth to them. Had I been so focused on being the perfect wife and mother that I'd made Michael feel expendable? Is it? Carmen asked gently, when was the last time you needed him for something? When was the last time you asked for his help with something you couldn't handle yourself? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. I was independent, capable, proud of my ability to manage our household and raise our son while building a freelance career. But had my competence somehow pushed my husband away? That doesn't justify what you did, I said, grasping for moral high ground that suddenly felt less solid beneath my feet. No, Carmen agreed. Nothing justifies it. Nothing makes it right. I am not trying to excuse what we did, only to help you understand how it happened. So, you started an affair because my husband felt unappreciated? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. We started an affair because we were both lonely, she corrected, because we found in each other something we felt was missing in our lives. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving lies. Instead, I saw exhaustion, genuine remorse, and something that looked like love complicated, messy, devastating love. Do you love him? I asked the same question I'd asked Michael. Yes, she said without hesitation. I love him very much. And he loves you. He says he does. Then why are you here? Why aren't you fighting for him? Carmen's eyes filled with tears. Because I have seen what our love has cost. I have seen the pain in your eyes, the confusion in Tommy's. I have seen a family destroyed because two selfish people thought their feelings mattered more than the promises that were made before I ever came into the picture. She wiped her eyes with a paper napkin, her mascara leaving dark smudges. I am going back to Guatemala, she said quietly. The word surprised me. What? I am going home. My visa expires next month anyway, and I was going to apply to renew it, but I cannot stay here. I cannot continue to be the reason your family is broken. Michael doesn't know? No, I will tell him tonight. We sat in silence again, the weight of her decision settling between us. In a strange way, I felt a grudging respect for her choice. It would have been easier to stay, to fight for the man she loved, to let me be the villain who broke up their relationship. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I want you to know that what happened between Michael and me was real. It wasn't just sex. It wasn't just a fling. We fell in love, truly and deeply, and under different circumstances, maybe it could have been something beautiful instead of something destructive. Her words should have hurt more, but instead they felt like a strange gift, the gift of truth, of understanding the real scope of what I was dealing with. But I also want you to know, she continued, that Michael's love for you never disappeared. He talked about you constantly, your talent, your strength, your beauty, the way you made him laugh in college, the way you cried when Tommy was born. Even when we were together, he was thinking about you. Then why? Because love is complicated, she said simply. Because people can love more than one person at a time, and sometimes those loves conflict with each other in terrible ways. She stood up, leaving her barely touched coffee on the table. I am sorry, Rebecca. I am sorrier than you'll ever know. And I hope someday, maybe not soon, but someday you can find a way to be happy again. You deserve happiness. She started to leave, then turned back. And Rebecca, whatever you decide about Michael, whatever happens with your marriage, don't let what we did make you think you are not enough. You are more than enough. You always were. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with my cold latte and 1,000 new questions about love, marriage, and the complicated ways that hearts can break and mend and break again. I sat in that cafe for another hour, watching people come and go, listening to fragments of other people's conversations about work drama and weekend plans and all the mundane concerns of lives that hadn't been shattered by betrayal. When I finally got home, Tommy was asleep on the couch, his Lego castle completed and standing proudly on the coffee table. I covered him with a blanket and kissed his forehead, breathing in his familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Can we talk? Please? I have something important to tell you." I stared at the message for a long time before turning off my phone without responding. Whatever he had to tell me could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I needed to sit with everything Carmen had shared, to process the strange gift of her honesty and the impossible complexity of love that she'd laid bare. For the first time since that day in the grocery store, I felt something other than anger or devastation. I felt the tiniest spark of possibility, not for reconciliation necessarily, but for understanding, for finding a way through this mess that honored the truth of what had happened while still protecting the innocent child sleeping peacefully on my couch. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes something is enough to build on. 6 months later, I stood in the same King Soopers where my world had shattered. But everything felt different now. Tommy walked beside me, no longer the confused 6-year-old who had shouted that devastating question in the pasta aisle, but a more mature 7-year-old who understood that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and families have to find new ways to love each other. "Can we get the cereal with the tiger on it?" he asked, echoing his request from that terrible day. "Of course," I replied, and this time I meant it. I'd learned to say yes to the small joys, to stop sweating the details that used to feel so important. Michael and I had been through 6 months of the most intense counseling of our lives. Some sessions had been brutal hours spent dissecting where our marriage had gone wrong, acknowledging the ways we'd both contributed to the distance that had made room for Carmen's presence in our lives. Other sessions had been revelatory, helping us understand that love isn't just a feeling but a choice, made new every day. He'd ended things with Carmen the night she'd told him about her decision to return to Guatemala. He'd come to my house the next morning, eyes red from crying, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he'd been completely honest with me. "I love her," he'd said, the words cutting through me like glass. "But I love you too, and I love Tommy, and I love the life we built together. I don't know if that's enough, or if it's too little too late, but it's the truth." It had taken me 3 weeks to agree to counseling. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, of conversations with my sister in Phoenix, of long walks in the mountains while Tommy stayed with my mother. 3 weeks of realizing that while Michael's betrayal had broken something fundamental in our marriage, it hadn't erased the 8 years of love that had come before it. Dr. Patricia Williams, our counselor, had explained it simply during our first session. Infidelity is like a grenade thrown into the middle of a marriage. It destroys everything in its immediate vicinity. But sometimes, if both people are willing to do the work, you can build something new from the pieces that remain. The work had been excruciating. Michael had to account for every lie, every moment of deception, every time he'd come home to our bed after being with Carmen. I'd had to examine my own role in the emotional distance that had developed between us, the ways I'd stopped seeing him as a partner and started treating him more like a helpful roommate. We'd learned that my independence, which I'd always seen as a strength, had sometimes felt like rejection to Michael, that his long hours at work, which I'd interpreted as dedication to our family's financial security, had been partly an escape from feeling unneeded at home, that we'd both been lonely in our marriage without realizing it, creating the perfect conditions for someone else to slip into the space between us. "Mommy, you're smiling," Tommy observed as we reached for the cereal. "You do that more now." He was right. The last 2 months had brought something I'd thought was lost forever: genuine happiness. Not the surface contentment I'd mistaken for happiness before, but real joy in small moments. Coffee with Michael on Sunday mornings while Tommy played in the backyard. Family movie nights where we all piled on the couch together. Conversations that went deeper than logistics and schedules. "I am happy," I told my son, and meant it. Our marriage wasn't the same as it had been before. It was more fragile in some ways, built on a foundation that we knew could crack. But it was also stronger in others, constructed with brutal honesty instead of comfortable assumptions. Michael had changed jobs, taking a position with a smaller firm that paid less but required fewer hours. We'd downsized to a smaller house in the same neighborhood, one that felt cozier, more intimate. We'd learned to talk to each other, really talk about fears and dreams, and 1,000 small disappointments that can accumulate in a marriage if left unaddressed. Rebecca! I turned at the sound of my name, and my stomach lurched. Standing at the end of the aisle was Carmen's cousin, Maria, who had worked as a substitute housekeeper for us a few times. "Maria," I said carefully, "how are you?" "I'm well, thank you." Her English was better than Carmen's had been, with less of an accent. "I wanted to tell you Carmen asked me to give you this if I ever saw you." She handed me a small envelope with my name written in Carmen's careful handwriting. "She is doing well in Guatemala," Maria added. "She got married last month, to a man she knew when she was young. She seems happy." The information hit me in unexpected ways. Relief that Carmen had found happiness, a strange sense of closure that felt both premature and necessary, and something that might have been gratitude for the gift she'd inadvertently given me, the destruction that had forced Michael and me to rebuild our marriage on more honest ground. "Thank you for telling me," I said. After Maria walked away, I stared at the envelope for a long moment. Tommy was examining cereal boxes, debating between two different cartoon mascots, blissfully unaware of the significance of this encounter. "Mommy, which one should we get?" "Get both," I said, making him grin with surprise and delight. We finished our shopping and loaded the groceries into my car, not the same SUV from that terrible day, but a newer model we'd chosen together as a family, one of many small decisions that had helped us reclaim ownership of our life. That evening, after Tommy was in bed and Michael was reading case files in his study, I sat in our backyard and opened Carmen's letter. Her handwriting was neat and careful, the words of someone who had thought long and hard about what to say. "Dear Rebecca, I hope this letter finds you at peace. Maria tells me you and Michael are working to repair your marriage, and I am glad. What we did was wrong, but that doesn't mean your love was not real or worth fighting for. I am writing to tell you that I am married now, to a good man named Carlos who knew me before I made so many mistakes. He is kind and patient, and he loves me despite my past. I hope you can find the same grace for Michael that Carlos found for me. I think about you often and about Tommy. I hope he remembers only the good times we shared, the cookies we baked, the games we played, the laughter. I hope the pain of how things ended fades, and what remains is only light. You are a remarkable woman, Rebecca, strong and beautiful and worthy of great love. I hope you know that. I hope you remember that when the healing feels too hard or the forgiveness feels impossible. Thank you for the gift of seeing what real love looks like, even though I nearly destroyed it. Watching you and Michael fight for each other has taught me more about marriage than I ever learned before. Be happy, both of you. You deserve nothing less. Con Carino, Carmen." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of anger or betrayal, but of something more complex, grief for the pain we'd all endured, gratitude for the wisdom that had emerged from it, and hope for the future we were building together. "Rebecca." Michael appeared in the doorway, concern creasing his features. "Are you okay?" I handed him the letter and watched his face cycle through the same complex emotions I'd experienced. When he finished reading, he sat beside me on the patio furniture where we'd had our first terrible conversation about his affair. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Grateful," I said, surprising us both. Grateful that she found happiness, grateful for her honesty, grateful that she made choices that prioritized healing over her own desires. And grateful it's over. I considered the question. Grateful that we're here, that we chose to fight for this, even when it would have been easier to give up. Michael took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that had once felt automatic, but now carried the weight of intentional choice. "I love you," he said, the words he'd said countless times over the years, but which meant something different now, deeper, more honest, more precious for having been nearly lost. I love you too, I replied and meant it completely. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and pink. In the distance, we could hear the sounds of our neighborhood, children playing, dogs barking, the normal rhythms of suburban life continuing around us. Daddy, Mommy, Tommy called from inside the house. Can we have ice cream? Michael and I looked at each other and laughed the first completely carefree laugh we'd shared in almost a year. Coming, I called back. As we walked toward the house together, I realized that the woman who had gone grocery shopping that devastating Tuesday morning was indeed gone forever. In her place was someone who understood that love wasn't a feeling to be maintained, but a choice to be made daily. Someone who had learned that perfection was less valuable than honesty, that comfort was less important than connection, that the appearance of happiness meant nothing if the foundation beneath it was built on lies. The aisle had been silent until Tommy shouted his innocent question. But from that silence, somehow, we had built something better, not perfect, but real. Not unmarked by pain, but stronger for having survived it. And as we walked inside to share ice cream with our son, I knew that tomorrow would bring new choices, new opportunities to love each other well. The future stretched ahead of us, uncertain but full of possibility, and for the first time in months, I was eager to see what we would build together. The mountains would still be there in the morning, solid and enduring, reminding us that some things last not because they're never tested, but because they're strong enough to weather whatever storms come their way. Just like love, just like family, just like the new life we were choosing to create together, one honest conversation, one difficult choice, one moment of grace at a time.